start with a short little video, and then the panelists will come up here, and we have a lovely panel which we'll introduce, and then go through a little presentation showing some pictures of Lochkelden over the years and sort of what just happened. And then we'll end with some Q&A from all of you, and I think a lot of call to action. I think there's lots of ways for people to get involved. And welcome. I'm Carrie Simpson with Invisible Histories, and Elka is right there.
Hello.
So we produce a monthly podcast and had the fortune of connecting with Scott Dolphy last year at the eminent sort of point that he was really concerned about what was going to happen with Lochkelden or the Roland Denny mansion. And so the rest is history. And now we're making history tonight. So thank you all for coming. And we're going to watch a quick little video and then...
Hey, can you get the lights, Carrie, too?
So if our panelists want to come up here.
Again, there we go. Panelists, how about onto the... All right.
Yeah, people here actually. All right. Well, welcome. We did want to start with kind of the sad videos of what happened there and the how it was taken down, to start that way but not end that way, hopefully. So we want tonight to be a chance to have people share their personal memories and thoughts and their relationship with this building. and then open it up for all of you to ask questions of this group. And then hopefully, yeah, like I said, some call to action for things that are even happening right now that you can get involved in. So let's have our panel go down the line and just introduce yourself and maybe your first connection with the Lochkelden building and yeah.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eugenia Wu. I'm the Director of Preservation Services at Historic Seattle. This is our building, so welcome to the Good Shepherd Center. Glad to be here tonight. Not glad, I mean, for the reason, but I do want to thank Invisible Histories for doing this event, so we can remember Lochkelden and kind of talk about its significance and history and what happened with the demolition, what brought that about. But so I've been doing advocacy with Historic Seattle since 2009, and my the first time I think I saw Lochkelden was in 2007 when the Museum of History and Industry did their centennial celebration there. So, and then in 2009, Historic Seattle had an event there, like a tour. So those were my initial sort of connections to the place.
I'm Scott Dolphay. I joined the church. I'm a member of the church, and I joined in 1981 actually in that building. That's where I first heard its teaching. And I'm a self-employed contractor, now retired, 68 years old. I've been working on that building off and on for years and years and years. This is tough. Yeah.
I'm Gene Sherrard, and I work on the column in the Seattle Times, Seattle Now and Then. Worked with Paul Dorpat from about 2005 as his appointed photographer, and then my partner Clay Eels and I took over in 2019. This was an interesting turn up, and it was actually Carrie and Elke who told me and Clay that they had heard from Scott that the mansion was due to come down, and so I think I called Scott and we talked for about an hour, and he confirmed this, and we were planning on a tour, and then the events kind of caught up with us, and the tour was taken off the menu. So we went down. I thought, well, we've got to repeat this photo. If you know the Now and Then column, we take an old photo and repeat it from the same location. Well, we had a marvelous old picture from Mohi, and so we thought maybe the best way to do this is to get on a boat. And as one of our passengers on this boat, we had Maria Denny, who's the great grandniece of Roland. And so Maria agreed to join us on this boat, and we motored down, or motored north, and ended up floating off of the shore, and above us there's this kind of magnificent Spanish stucco mansion built by Denny. And I had not visited it in 2007 or 2009, and so I'd never been on the grounds before. But even from below, there was something kind of special about this place. So Maria kind of stood on the bow of the boat, and I took the shot over her shoulder with the mansion hovering up above. So that's, and then when it was torn down, again, I think Carrie contacted me and said, you know, it's the end is near. So I grabbed a camera and ran up there and shot some of the pictures you saw, including the destruction, the video of destruction. So.
Hello, thank you all for coming. My name is Kurt Petrowskis with Earthwise Architectural Salvage, as so often happens, we get involved in these projects, which some of them prove to be very difficult to do, but we are always very, very thankful that we do have the opportunity to preserve and salvage out as much as we can. Kind of my first impression, I didn't know anything about the project. Paul told me that, hey, Dad, you come out and have a look at this place. This place is something special. And I came out to it. And my first impression of the house was, what a goofy way to approach the house. The driveway kind of came up, and you saw the house, and you could see how large of a house it was, but you were actually at the back of the house. And I was like, I'm so confused here. What a strange layout. And I walked through and immediately overwhelmed at what I was saying, and then I walked out what I would say was the front door, which actually faced the lakeside. And apparently there's a story to that design and construction the way it was, and what an impressive house, and in a lot of different ways. But that was my first impression, and I think it was before automobiles were the way to get there.
Yeah.
So
Everything came by boat.
everything came by boat, hence its orientation being lakefront, where now the roads come in from behind. I was like, what the heck? So it was a truly, truly amazing house.
Well, the original estate, I think it was more than 50 acres that the house was built on. It was backed by virgin timber. So you had, this was a country estate at the time. And the Dennys built it, or Roland built it, to be kind of a little palace on the very outskirts of Seattle. Interestingly, if you look across from the Denny estate, there is another Denny estate right across Lake Washington, and I can imagine the two brothers waving at each other.
Signal flare, like signal semaphore.
Yeah. Shall we pass down? Let's switch mics.
Here, yeah,
Okay.
pass, one
Oh,
back
yeah.
to me, and then,
I'm gonna see if I can make that one a little louder.
yeah, I can have this after. And unfortunately, Leonard Garfield from Mo High was supposed to be here tonight. Unfortunately, had a mishap with where he was supposed to go and is not coming. So I'm hoping that Eugenia can kind of fill in some of the background, architectural, or Scott also kind of why was this house so significant and interesting, and like some of why there was a lot of interest in it, I guess. And
Where was the house?
The house is just south of Magnuson Park.
Oh.
I
in
mean,
Windermere.
very, very close, and it was.
Yeah, that's good.
So as you you can. It's what do you think, Scott? Quarter mile to Magnuson Park. It's not far.
Yeah, something like that. And the property that remained was basically about 1 acre and 3/4. Again, it was in essence 50 acres when it was built. It was outside the city limits of Seattle. Again, Roland worked for Dexter Horton, or with him, whatever. And so his commute was by boat, by steamboat. And then took the trolley over Madison Park, over the hill, into downtown. I believe that was.
Yeah, I read there was a ferry, or like a passenger ferry that took off from Magnuson Park, or from
Madison Park.
Yeah, Madison Park, and then people could ferry over to this, if they didn't have their own boat. But yeah, it's hard to see. I did put this map up. This is an 1863 Department of Interior survey that I believe someone sent us. But generally where that arrow is pointing, right now we're up at the very top. Oh, good. That's perfect.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Up at the top, that kind of big bump that's sticking out, that's today's Magnuson Park, and like where the dog park is and the soccer fields and all the buildings up there. But back then it was open land. And I think right near where that top plus sign is where Roland's plat was, his land. So that was just an orientation. Also just to note, like, there was no Montlake Cut, there was no Ship Canal, there were no Ballard Locks. So Lake Washington was landlocked unless you could get down the Duwamish through the Black River at that time. So it was a very different Seattle.
When they built the locks, it dropped the lake 9 feet. That's when it was there.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So this is a cool, from Society magazine. So the Dennys were featured in this magazine, and you can see the picture of it. I believe this was from 1913, something like that.
1909.
I was gonna say Greg will know, 'cause
Yes,
it's from him.
we got that from you.
Yes.
And yeah, before the ivy grew and when there were a lot more trees in the area. And what is this? Do you know what the equipment
So
is?
it's from Mohai's collection,
Oh.
actually, and it was an therapy machine that was actually supposedly used by Roland Denny.
Ooh, at the house?
I'm not sure about that part, but
Okay.
it was one of the items that Mohai had in their collection.
Okay.
So, very cool.
All right, next slide. Yeah, this was from 1913. This is Homes and Gardens of the Pacific Coast, and the Lochkelden was featured. And one thing just to note, we've seen it written both ways as one word, Lochkelden, and also as two here. So we weren't sure which to do, but it appears both in our presentation today. But this whole magazine is available in the Seattle Municipal Archive to look
No,
at.
the
Or
CW.
We've done
UW.
special collections.
Special collections, yeah. All right.
And for those that don't know, of course, a lot of wealthy people with estates, they would name the estate. And of course, that's the name of the estate. Loch, Scottish for lake. Alice Kellogg was the wife, and Roland Denny, the husband. So Lochkelden.
If only we could name things like that now.
Yeah, you still can.
All right,
Next one.
next slide. Oh yeah, these were some amazing pictures, I think, that came from Jean, that came from the Denny family, of just some fun and games and playing on the dock. This is Roland Denny in the upper right. Yeah, kids playing in the field and the grass. And yeah, Eugenia, do you want to share kind of some of or Scott, some of the architectural, I know it's called mission style or Spanish mission style. Spanish revival from California. But kind of what were the significant architectural features or historical importance?
So it was designed by Bevan Mendel, which designed the Fry Hotel, I believe. A few different buildings that are still existing, mostly more commercial type. Bev was British, Mendel was German. Bev served or worked under Louis Sullivan. I think they call the father of architects, skyscrapers, something like that. And in the same office was Frank Lloyd Wright. So they were very prominent architects of Seattle at the time. The building, we're not looking at the
Here,
building.
maybe go forward one more.
One more.
Oh, sorry, actually go back two.
That's the
That's
carriage
the carriage
house.
house, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so first glance it seems kind of symmetrical, but it's actually not. There's different bump outs and the windows up second floor. That's the master bedroom. They're kind of sunk in. So it's just interesting how it's unique throughout the building. Also, there's a deck on the second floor. There's a deck in every direction, right? Which we did since the church bought it in '73. We've inflation-adjusted dollars, factoring in value of volunteer work. We put at least $2 million into it. All the plumbing was new. Much of the electrical was updated. We replaced the roof with the best tile in the world in the mid-'80s. There's a copper piece in the back here. Actually, Reverend Moon really loved this building, and so he instructed a lot of Japanese members to make donations to do the outside restoration, which really saved the building. And so the tile was replaced with Japanese Toyo tile, and he sent 4 of our skilled workers from Japan who signed that piece of copper over there, which was only discovered when it was torn down.
Wow.
So that's something I learned through this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still, even though we put so much into it, it still could have used practically another $1 million of work. Virtually, the front deck there, you see with the kind of round arches in the middle, that's the smallest deck. It was also protected from the elements, so it had the least issues. But the 3 other decks were more exposed, and each one of them really needed to be completely rebuilt. I did some triage work in the hopes that things won't collapse until we can get to a point. I was hoping for grants. But one other thing, I'd like to acknowledge Bonnie here. Bonnie, could you? Yeah. Yeah.
Scott and I work on some grants together.
Yeah, we
Actually trying to move towards landmark.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. We some near misses, some real near misses here, real near misses. The church.
One grant paid for the centennial celebration.
The first grant we got from Department of Neighborhoods was a $50,000 grant that paid for the one-day centennial celebration. And it was the first time that it was open to the public like that, and about 2,000 people came. And hopefully you can look at some of the collage I put back there, which is some of the history. But when we bought it in 1973, virtually every single neighbor in the neighborhood fought to keep us from using it for church purposes because there was so much fear of our church. And so that went on from like 1973 to basically 1980. And obviously we had to spend a lot of money on lawyers, and it was a big battle. So there was this kind of sour feeling towards us in the neighborhood until we had the centennial. And that really broke through that. And that was actually following that. And the carriage house burned down the year of the centennial, ironically. Yeah. But because it burned down, that actually got in the news, and then it got in the news that we were having the centennial. So it was this weird series of events that led to this amazing event, which was the centennial. And Leonard Garfield at that time, he agreed to do the tours. And he had never, like 2 weeks before, he'd never even seen the place, I believe. And it was like Shangri-La, just something you kind of heard of, and you could see from the lake and that kind of thing. And then he saw it, and he just, I want to do the tours. This is where I wish I had it here, but yeah. So I learned a lot about the architecture from him because he's an architectural historian. But yeah.
For those of us that don't know, can you tell us really quickly why it got demolished?
We will definitely get to that
Yeah.
in our presentation, yeah.
Yeah.
We're kind of jumping around a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, Jenny, did you have anything else to add about the architecture?
Yeah, I
or
mean,
the-
when we talk about the sort of more Spanish influence mission revival, so the shaped parapets is definitely a character-defining feature of both the carriage house that was burned down and also of the building. And you don't see that style that much here in the Northwest. You do occasionally. So this was one of them. You know, the front, which the lake front, the east-facing front. I mean, the front door was, we're talking about character-defining features, the front door, the entryway, and the room that opens up into. You saw some, when they showed the video, there were some photographs. I took some of them a couple years ago. And it shows the fireplace, you know, with the copper hood, and you know, the woodwork, the trim.
On the original tapestry wall covering.
Exactly, the tapestries, and you'll see some of that back there on the Earthwise table, and it was all there, and I just really want to give kudos to Scott. I mean, this is really, in the very beginning, I know this is how difficult this is for you. I mean, I met Scott in 2007, 2009, and so we've talked off and on over the years, and he truly kept the place, the work that he did there, in restoration and repair. It was a lot of work, and it was amazing, you know, using his own skills and his background and his love for the place. And he really kept the place really well maintained. Want to thank you for that. And then also thank the church members who were supportive of historic preservation and what they tried to do. And I think we'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, it's a really special house, and Bev and Mendel were definitely one of the most prominent firms in Seattle at the time. Yeah.
They were based here, the architecture firm. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think next slide, I think we might have a, yeah, this is a little bit blurry. This was the 1936 aerial, so you can see the beach. You can see the beach, and the house is sort of there in the middle, and the carriage house is behind, but you can, there was like an orchard, I think. These were all the grounds, and yeah, the lake is down in the far right corner.
The other lines, they're other lots. Subdivided
Today's lots, yeah.
Right, so the main, that big rectangular section, that's the property.
How many structures are we seeing in this picture?
If I may, here.
Do-
So, it's really bad.
Yeah, it's,
I believe this is,
Yes.
yeah, that's the main house.
right.
And
Then
then-
the carriage house is back here.
Okay,
It's still on the property.
right.
This, which ironically you can see most clearly is a house, that single house up there,
Yeah.
that was built for Ron and Denny's daughter,
Oh, forget it.
which still exists.
Oh, wow. Okay, and then next slide. Yeah, this was the waterfront lodge, which I didn't know existed either, and this was built in 1908, so, and I think that was right down close to the lake. Probably the man cave, right? Like where maybe Roland went to go get away from everybody and do some fishing, or. But a cute little house. It has a very tragic story, which we don't need to tell today, but how it ended up. But I think it reflects some of the architecture. I'm not sure, but. And I think there's one more,
Okay.
or maybe not. I can't remember what I did. Oh, yeah, so I don't know if there was any other comments about the waterfront lodge, Scott, or that was probably way before your time, but.
That one I know nothing about. The other picture I could probably speak to.
Okay, great.
Okay, so yeah, next.
Yeah.
So I guess now we've kind of gone through, and actually, I'm assuming, are there any Denny descendants here tonight? We don't think so, but, or friends of the Denny family?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Maria couldn't be here, who was part of the article with Jean and Clay, but yeah, so we've kind of gone through the Dennys. There was another owner, and then, as Scott said, the Unification Church purchased it in 1973. And so this was a picture Scott showed us of kind of this first meeting of the Centennial Planning Committee.
Maybe I'll take it from here.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so that there's some old people in here I've noticed. Anybody remember Greg Palmer?
Yeah.
King 5 News?
Yeah.
Yeah. Turns out he was, through divorce and remarriage, he's related to Roland Denny. And when I was planning the Centennial, then I had heard there was this group of Denny descendants, and I wanted to reach out to them to invite them to the Centennial. But because there's been so much bigotry towards our church, and honestly it generally comes mainly from white people and Asian people, But I wanted to reach out to the Duwamish first, and my plan was to get to the Denny's through the Duwamish, right? But then the carriage house burned down. So the centennial was in September, and the carriage house burned down, I think, in June or something. So it went into the papers that the carriage house burned down, and then the reporter, I mentioned to the reporter, well, we're planning the centennial. And then Greg caught wind of that, and they reached out to us. And they weren't the least bit bigoted. They were wonderful people. He and his wife grew up on Mercer Island. And so it was this amazing connection. And there's a podcast that will be coming out later, right? Anyway, I talk more about my connection and history, but my wife and I couldn't have children. We ended up adopting a Down syndrome boy that was born in Hiroshima, Japan. So he was just a very young child at this time. But Greg and Kathy had a Down syndrome son, and that made an immediate connection to us. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Well, Greg Palmer's grandfather was a UW professor, Lyndon Mander. I don't know if anybody here remembers him. He hosted that show on KCTS Connects, where he interviewed these lucky mucks, and he had kind of a long face, and he was bald, and had a hook nose. I don't know what subject he taught there.
And anyway, Greg was really wonderful guy, and sadly he died about 3 years after the centennial of lung cancer. But that part was sad. I've stayed connected as much as I could to Kathy.
Yeah, and then we have this poster and then some pictures from the centennial, so we can...
That one poster, by the way, there's several of them left over, and anybody wants one, you can have them. They're just sitting back there.
A souvenir. There you are. It's a great film.
That was taken for a story that was done in the PI, and Greg was responsible for getting that story, and the other one in the Times. So the best media coverage we ever had was thanks to Greg.
Wow. And that was also from the same article, I believe.
Right.
Quite a view.
Ah.
You, Jenny, had time traveling?
Don't we all wish we looked like that back then? Still?
That was during our event, that was during the Historic Seattle tour in 2009. And that is Larry Kreisman, so many of you know him, and our volunteers. Yeah, and a much younger and thinner me.
And see the open window in the back there? It's those windows.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
The dining room was pretty amazing because it had this built-in cabinetry, and there was a mirror. And then, of course, windows on this side facing the lake. So from either side of the dining table, you had a view, thanks to the mirror or the windows.
The sweeping view of the lake and Mount Rainier, just unbelievable.
Yeah, there's the view, those cool lights.
Yeah, in the day you can imagine, because it was so long ago, Roland could kind of take his pick of any lot that he wanted. And so the views of Mount Rainier were really stunning. Yeah, that year we were building a retaining wall and building a lawn out in the front, which it didn't have before.
Is there a city street between there and the lake?
Well, again, the lake was dropped 9 feet, which created lots below, or became lots. And so there's a private road down below and houses.
What's the name of that road, do you know?
Hmm?
Do you know the name of
I think it's just extension of Windermere Road, but it becomes private.
You're right.
In the day, in '73, when we bought the place, Some of those lots were undeveloped below, so if we had a bit more money, we could have waterfront property.
Yeah, these are kind of the known pictures that are in, I believe, the Mohai collection. These are from 1926. Is that right, Gene?
I think that's from 26, and this is from like 13.
Okay.
This is much earlier.
Yeah, actually, yeah, a specific question for Jean that we just wanted to ask you, kind of just as a journalist and someone wanting to daylight the truth as part of your work. What did you see as, in this particular case, kind of the darkness or the challenges or obstacles facing preservation of this particular building?
Well, I was talking to Scott about, and I haven't met him personally before today, but we spent about an hour on the phone. And, it was really evident that he just, and you saw here tonight, how much he loved this place. And I told him, I'm not religious. I find all religions a little bit silly. And so I won't make an exception for yours, but I'm down with the, I feel the same way about so my point being that right now, we see churches confronted with these decisions all around the area. And so to me, that's confronting that possible future is pretty important. And as, and Eugenia can describe this because she's been fighting this battle for a long time, but there was a 1990 decision by our Supreme Court. And it was a battle that had gone on for years between the First Covenant Church in Seattle, who wanted to change its facade and do some reconstruction. And landmarking forbade it. So they went to the Supreme Court and had essentially religious institutions can, what would you say?
Be excluded.
Can be excluded from landmarking. Well, as I discovered talking to Jeffrey Oxner, who's a professor of architecture at the University of Washington, and I didn't know this, Washington State's landmarking, that ruling by our Supreme Court is one of the most conservative or property rights friendly in the country. Most states do not have those exemptions for their religious institutions. So that's what I think makes me, that's where I'm very concerned. If you've looked at the university, the avenue, the Methodist Church near the University Bookstore, and up on the corner above the Grand Illusion, these were some, lovely buildings that were taken down and sold to become 501s, and I don't think they've done anything with the Methodist Church yet, but it's just, there's something kind of, there's a real shame when Clay and I cover these topics. We probably experienced the most public response for any of our columns come about when people grieve over the loss of beautiful buildings. And churches, even though we are largely unchurched in this area, churches do provide and have always provided a community space. And so what we've done with a number of Christian Science churches, Town Hall, for example, where Leonard went to mistakenly, those churches, we managed to save them by hook and by crook. And so my concern is just that when we're looking at this stuff, we're going to be losing more and more as time goes on. Right now, Plymouth Church, which is an interesting structure, I can't speak to its architectural qualities, but it's down to about 100 members in the church. What happens, and these 100 members are socially aware, responsible, but they're going to have to make a choice sooner or later what to do with this property, which is worth many, many millions of dollars at 6th and University. It's half a block. what will they do with it? You know, they are exempt from landmarking laws, so they could tear it down. And I'm not picking on them, I'm just saying that all churches have this ability to get rid of what I think are often important structures and remove them and replace them with structures that really don't lift the soul. I like a steeple. I like a bell. So that's my plea for moving forward. And right last week there's a bill now.
Yeah, let's not talk about that right now.
No, I think we should at least mention it.
We will, but it'll
Yeah,
be
we'll talk about it at the end.
Okay,
We
we'll
have
talk
a
at
call
the
to action for people to actually make
So,
some comments.
I'm done with my.
Yeah.
I just want to say more about the whole church and state issue. So there was more than, I'm not a lawyer, but there were a couple court cases. So the one that Jean mentioned, and then there was another one concerning the former First United Methodist Church in downtown on 5th and Marion. It's now an event space, and there's a tower, a high-rise next to it. So the Landmarks Preservation Board designated that back in, I think, 1985, and the church didn't want it designated. So they fought that. They went to the hearing examiner, the church lost, and then went through the court system, the state court system. And finally, in 1996, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the church. Essentially, it was a religious freedom issue. That designation somehow hindered them from their use, however they want to use the building. Even though landmarking does not dictate use, essentially, if designation puts controls on their property, then that isn't, in their minds, enough to be a hindrance on their freedom of religion. So it was a 5-4 vote, so it was actually close. And so that is an exception in the city of Seattle for now. Owner consent is not required for a landmark designation. It's preferred, but it's not required. And in the majority of landmarks, usually the owner either voluntarily presents it or they're okay with it. And there are many actually churches that have been landmarked in Seattle, and they're great stewards of these religious spaces. But as congregations dwindle, they have these buildings, and it's difficult for them to maintain, and they say their mission is not historic preservation, it's something else, and then developers are chomping at the bit, and they upzoning and just add, increased density, all these factors add pressure to these places, these sacred spaces. And so whenever we see so it's not just buildings that are used for religious purposes. Any property owned by a religious entity is subject to the same regulation, to this law. So it could be a house, it could be a commercial building, it could be an old labor temple, it could be anything that a religious entity purchases as part of their real estate portfolio. And there are churches who have a portfolio and they don't use it for religious purposes, so these can be torn down. And we've been seeing it in Belltown, we've been seeing downtown, all in the U District, as Jean mentioned. And these places have, a lot of meaning to the communities, and it's really tough to see. I love Plymouth Congregational Church downtown. It's a beautiful mid-century modern building. And then there are others that have been adaptively reused, and which is great. Some are condos, and some are event spaces, and then there was a recent one in the U District. It was the Third Church of Christ Scientists on 17th
Yep.
and 50th. Yeah. And so that one we were concerned about. It was owned by a different church. The third church itself was moved elsewhere, and they actually sold it. It has a parking lot and they have the building, and they actually sold it to another church. So it was actually being used for the original purpose, which is great. And we asked them if they wanted to be landmarked. They said no. We said okay. Although we did slip in a landmark nomination in between ownership when it was privately owned for a little while. We pulled together a nomination in like 3 weeks and we submitted it, but it didn't move forward. And so,
Just Leonard Kreisman actually went through that church and photographed all of its gorgeous stained glass windows. So he has records of the third church.
Larry did,
stained
yeah.
glass. And they're really quite
Yeah.
lovely. So.
yeah. So this is the toughest when over the years when I've talked to Scott about this issue, I was thrilled earlier, and this may be coming, that you were going to seek a landmark nomination for Lochkelden, because it looked like the church was able to just say, yeah, go ahead with it. And so that was really good to hear, but then unfortunately things changed, and he could speak more about that. And so there's just, unfortunately, our hands are kind of tied. We've had our attorneys look at, anytime this kind of issue comes up, we think there's a different angle on it that we can somehow, if there's a loophole in the law, and we asked our attorney to look at it, and unfortunately we haven't found one yet. So to challenge it.
I have a quick question just to divert over to Kurt, who's been sitting patiently.
Always listening.
Okay. My question for Kurt was, well, we were standing, so Kurt was next to me when we were shooting that video of the claw coming down, and Kurt said, we see this often. It's you take great timber and you turn it into matchsticks. But as we're watching, I think Kurt, you may have described the feeling of coming to a lot of these classic buildings and having to, you're looking through them to see what you can salvage. But at the same time, there's got to be a moment when you have to take the hammer and start breaking things. When you have to start pulling it apart. Mm-hmm. And I think, what are the feelings that go through someone who's, so you're doing the salvage, you're taking, I think you called it urban forestry?
Maybe, yeah.
Was it urban? where you go into these
other things.
You go into these buildings and
right.
you take out the great wood
right.
that is from trees that are 1,000 years old,
right.
and so you have this old growth timber which is thrown into the trusses, and when you cut across them, you see that these today you can't find that doesn't exist.
No, the wood today is it's all quick grown in forests, sustainable from that aspect that it grows in daylight. Tree growth is amazing to me, and I have fantastic science. But no, as far as the houses go, when we get involved in some of these, speaking of the churches, the amazing thing for me is I found out everything that you're finding out the day we met, and Scott, and I found out all this information in the house, and as I find that out, I'm finding out last minute. Because of all the different projects we go to, and then this one was clearly something special when I approached it. And then to find out the history and the stories, the clamshell over the front door. I hope you show that one. That one's one of my favorite ones. And then to think about the history that's involved in it, and in my point of view, the senseless act of crunching it, as you saw at the opening scene. That's how the vast majority of these structures are being dealt with. There's some really great initiatives that are starting in Seattle and then also in Kenmore, but they're gaining momentum and gaining steam, and I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah, actually, Yeah, maybe go one more so we can look at some of there's 2 or 3 different slides that show, there's on the right, that clamshell.
Can we get to that?
Oh yeah, maybe dim these. There, that's perfect.
So this is something that Earthwise mentioned to me. When I arrived, the portico had been taken down, but I suddenly realized they described it as a clamshell. And this may be dubious, but it's fun to think of, because the story of Rollin and the clam nectar, there may be a sly reference to that clam nectar over his front door there. So if you don't know the story, Rollin was 3 months old when he arrived in Seattle with the Denny party in November of '51, and was the youngest member of the party. His parents were both, most likely had malaria, and his mom had no milk. So the Duwamish somehow communicated that when they were in similar circumstances, they would provide their babies with clam nectar. So they showed the Denny's, they demonstrated how to cook up the clams and pull out nectar. And evidently, it did save this starving infant's life, and that was Roland Denny. So I just posited that maybe that clamshell was a little bit.
Yeah, and you can see that today at the Kenmore Earthwise store, unless someone came and snapped it up in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kurt, I did want you to actually talk about it, because we kind of cheekily named tonight like divine deconstruction to kind of talk about that play between religion and historic preservation. But you pointed out, or Eric both, that architectural deconstruction is something different than what happened. Like what you described, what happened here is a salvage job, right? And architectural deconstruction is something totally different. And if you want to share what that is and sort of that movement, like you were talking about in Kenmore
Sure.
and beyond, that would be great.
Sure. Typically, as we all know, when a house gets demolished, usually you'll bring in the wrecking ball. Big machines, heavy equipment. That house was down in 2 days. And it was cleared in 3. So it's pretty amazing. Obviously, with the speed that happens, they salvage it, nothing. There's quite a large movement that's been happening for, it's a slow roll, and it's kind of rolling out now, and we're always very thankful for participation with the different municipalities. The way we came by this project was, right now there's a city ordinance, it's called a salvage assessment form. So anytime a house gets demolished right now, you have to notify a company like ours and say, this house is coming down, could you run through this house, take a look at it, and give us a checklist or do a salvage assessment on this property, which is going to identify reusable building materials. Primarily doors, windows, cabinets, not the lumber end of the equation and the makeup. So that's actually part of the process right now in the city of Seattle. That's how we came by this project. The developers called us and wanted to have a salvage assessment. Once we saw what was there, then of course there's an incredible amount of reuse potential in that house. And they put us in contact with the church, and because they were the owners of it, and little loophole things where how they presented, I do believe, to the new owners has to be a vacant lot. So we were actually brought on through the church and did that salvage prior to the transitional to the new owners, but initially brought on by the demolition contractors. The new movement is kind of happening, I'm trying to make this really quick. People have been reusing building materials ever since the Mayans. And in Portland, they started a deconstruction ordinance, meaning any house built prior to 1940, I'm going to say, has to be deconstructed, literally taken apart by hand, board by board, stick by stick. I started the company 30 years ago, and that's exactly how we started. We started doing deconstruction, which then morphed into now we'll just do interior salvages prior to the mechanical deconstruction. hard to compete with a machine who can do a house that big. Probably took a year and a half to build, or more. To do that manually would have taken, depending upon the resources thrown at it, 3 weeks minimum to deconstruct it. They removed it in 3 days. So to beat the bulldozer time, hard to do. Seattle's looking at adopting that. I'm not sure exactly where it sits right now. Kenmore is also looking at, waiting kind of for a Seattle lead on that. Has to be go through the city council and voted on and then passed. Whether they're hopeful it will, we don't know, is the end of the day. It started rolling. I want to say Portland's been doing it for maybe 5 years now, Paul? Something like that. Yeah. And so Seattle's kind of trying to get it together, and I'm not sure where it sits on that. I know there's a lot of interested people that want that to happen. So what we did is we did an actual salvage prior to the demolition. And then with this one, because we were brought on through Scott, we found out who the demolition contractor was and the contact. I met the demolition company and worked with them during the course of the actual removal, and which we had the opportunity to even salvage more. A few beams, most of them were toothpicks, but that's where the metal or the copper sheet came from, was discovered during that phase of it. And I can't help myself. As tiles were falling off of the roof, I'm grabbing them as if they're not broken, as they hit the bush, you know, on the side. So I'm still salvaging during this whole ordeal of it coming down mechanically. And it's very painful to see that, but I always have to be grateful for the fact that we do get in there and we salvage out as much as we can.
Yeah. And can you talk, I pulled this picture because there was an Instagram reel of you talking about the wood and the flat grain, and for the non-wood people in the room, like,
Well,
why was this a significant way to make panels and doors?
So these are pocket doors, immense, very large pocket doors. It is so funny. I love this house. Nothing had been painted in this particular room. So 100 years plus, and it never received a coat of paint. Phenomenal, very, very rare. If we run into houses like this, we remove all of the wood and the box beams. So the doors, and stylistically, today, probably for the last 20 years in construction, people love vertical grain fir. Everybody wanted, we have VG fir, very unique. And back when this house was built, they used the VG fir for their soffits outside. They didn't, you know, they might use it for the jambs of the door, but look at the panels on these pocket doors, and this is called a flat sawn look to them. And you could tell they were very large trees and very selected out for the grain quality of this wood. I had never seen any representation that was better than this. It really something that I hadn't seen. And for me, there was so much about this house that I got so excited about, and I wound up spending a lot of time in the removal, and I can talk, that's what I can attest to, is the quality of the materials and the construction of this house.
In short, you could never build this house today.
No.
It's just,
if you did, you'd have to take this apart and recreate it with the same
Very
product.
well, this is made from 1,000-year-old trees.
Yeah.
Quite possible.
Yeah. I mean, it was a truly amazing house, and there's a lot I can address to that, but we can go
Maybe
into.
one more. Yeah, here's the cool fireplace, which I heard someone from the church has, Scott, do you know?
Yes, and 4 stained glass windows as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and then the tapestry wall, it's not wallpaper, it's actually fabric.
Wow.
Which you can see the actual stuff over on the table.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to see the original, or how the sun had actually faded it. There's an example there where it was behind the wall sconce. And you remove the wall sconce and you can see the original coloration of the fabric and how it was faded by it was a east-facing direction in that room.
Yeah, some of the interesting lighting from all different eras, I think.
There was a combination of errors, and it so often happens. It was kind of funny, Scott, and I'm giving you either the credit or the blame for this, but one of the fascinating things that I love about my job, it's a treasure hunt. Because during the course of the times, as houses go through different remodels, especially during the Depression, things didn't get thrown away. They get tucked in the attics, they get tucked in the basements, they get tucked into all different ways and get walled off. And we have found some amazing treasures, really, really fun. I was positive we were gonna find something here and worked very, very diligently and to find something. And unfortunately, that house had been gone through in such a manner with the plumbing and we pulled out bookshelves up on the third floor expecting to find the hidden void and newspapers or something. We were gonna find something. I was absolutely positive of this. We pulled it out and out comes a big puff of blown-in insulation, you know, and blown-in insulation covers anything that's laying there or anything that can be found. And I can't believe how thoroughly that house had been gone through and cleaned, insulated, and replumbed.
And cared for.
And cared for. It was, generally, I would have lost the bet if I would have gone into that house, because we always, marbles, you know, if kids marbles, or if I got a jar of them, I pulled out a house, they go rolling down the heat registers and wind up in the octopus in the basement.
Okay. Can I tell a poignant story
Sure,
about?
here.
Okay. Yeah, poignant story about the blown-in insulation. So the sewage originally when that was built, where do you think the sewage went?
Lake.
Right in the lake, right? So then at some point they sold off lots and they never thought of getting an easement, sewer easement downhill. So the sewage actually is pumped uphill. And there's a tank that has 2 sewage pumps in it, are fairly expensive. I actually climbed in that tank and installed those pumps. So I knew how valuable they were. It was the last thing left on the top. Yeah, okay. It was the last thing left that had any value. The building was gone. They really cleaned that site. I mean, there's hardly a speck of concrete, anything. So I'm there. Turns out the pumps were too heavy for me to lift up, so I left them. But not that I wanted to get in the tank. Anyway, so there's this one ball of about the size of a soccer ball of blown-in insulation sitting there. There's like that was all that was left of the building. And again, I joined the church in '81. The first job I did fixing that building was blowing in that insulation. So I felt like, wow. The first thing I did is sitting right there. So there you go.
Can I ask a quick?
So some of you may have seen this earlier, but there was a doghouse
Oh, yeah.
built.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering,
It's in the
and
video.
Kurt, you were talking about maybe saving the doghouse.
We got saved.
Did it get saved? Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, Kurt, tell us how fun it was to get the doghouse.
Well, it was, they love their dog. They love their dog dearly, and it's a cobblestone face, and the roof is actually mimicking, so I think it was original to the house.
Yes,
It was,
yes, absolutely.
yeah, and solid concrete pour, probably river rock or lake from the lake. I'm sure they collected the rocks out of the lake. And so we couldn't lift it. We didn't mechanically, to get around the backside, we didn't have the machinery. The operator who did the actual demolition, we wound up bringing straps out there, and Aaron wound up strapping it and precariously getting it into and rolling into our container, and successfully salvaged the doghouse. And
Wow.
which is, you know, we couldn't get the house, but we got the doghouse.
And I heard from Maria Denny, and she showed me some pictures of her father Brewster, and visiting Lochkelden when he was 8 years old, 9 years old, and his beloved dog, actually, I believe, stayed in that doghouse. So there's a Denny family dog.
Where's the doghouse now?
It's at the Kenmore store. Yeah, so it's, and we've got it. And I'd love to, I think it'd be really great to sandblast the paint off of the river rock on the front of it. I think would look
But it
really.
weighs about 1,000 pounds.
It's probably a ton, yeah, or half ton, yeah. It's at least 1,000 pounds. It can't be moved, and it doesn't actually have a concrete floor, which I thought it did, filled with dirt and grass, but actually it doesn't. But it's substantial, and it held together with straps and everything else. Very well made, like the house was well made. So that's another thing. The amount of lumber that went into building this house was phenomenal. We wound up salvaging a lot of fir flooring, all the doors, all the windows. We did our due diligence on this house. We spent about probably 3 weeks there. 3 weeks, and I can't even tell you how many truckloads that we pulled out of there. Usually around, one every day or 2 days, a full truckload. But when we get involved in this, they're so rare that we get involved in a house like this. And it made me, when I learned about the history, it broke my heart. I mean, holy cow, this is one of the founding father members of this region. And I was just, it's really too bad that it did go down. But I am very, very happy that we did get to salvage it.
The front door that faces the lake that you were looking at, legend has it that, of course, the log cabin that was built in 1851 by David Denny, it was torn down about, I think, 16 years before this was built. And legend has it that they saved some components of the original logs, milled them down, and put them inside that front door.
Yes.
Also, it's arguable that Mohi was founded out of this building too. I won't go into that, but that seems to be the case.
So that's the front door.
That door,
the front
yes,
door.
yes. So the outside, what you're seeing, that's a skin, and that's not original. So, but it can. We've saved it, and you have it in your garage.
I have it in my garage. I'm intimately, and actually I bought one of the chandeliers for my house too. So not one of the nice, cool, one from the 2000s that Scott had put in, but I didn't put a picture of it.
Yeah, there's an ornate grill that goes over that. We have all that. So.
Wow. I know we're a little bit running longer, but do people have specific questions for any of the panelists right now? Yeah, we don't have to leave on this picture if, yeah, let's do it. Yeah, a question, and yeah.
My question is, I was working with the team to sell the house, and kind of got caught in a riptide or wherever it is, cross current. There's a group in the church called the Preservation Group, and then there's certain other people, especially the district pastor, who wanted to sell it. Okay. Don't need to use the microphone.
Can you get it?
Did everybody hear that okay? I was kidding.
Okay.
We can hear him.
I'll keep it real simple, we were trying to talk, I was trying to work with Bonnie, and how do you find a preservation buyer? And just so you know, the whole deal was like, I'm trying to figure this out, I'm talking to Bonnie and some other people.
Edward,
yeah.
I tried to find a preservation buyer.
But you try to find, but what I realized is like, there was no, somebody that really knew the stuff. How do you actually find a preservation buyer? Not only that, unless you put some kind of thing into the deed, what I found out is we were in 4 different deals, every single person had a feasibility, feasibility. And what you would find is the whole deal would change at the end of the feasibility. They go, well, actually, every time they would lower the price, they say we got to do this, that, and the other. And I realized actually without a legal person to put something on there that they couldn't tear the house down. People tell you they're going to save the house, somebody, and then later you find out actually, well, they might or they might not. So that's
maybe looking for a better deal, basically.
So my question is, there was no expert advice on how do you actually find a preservation buyer.
Yeah.
That's just my comment. It's not really a question.
And by the way, the church really did want to save it, so we were willing to take a lower price to save it.
Bonnie and myself, we were married in that day.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We both.
Yeah.
And Bonnie's a professional grant writer too, so. What?
happened? How did you end up?
One of the ways one of the ways you can find a preservation buyer is to work with a real estate agent that is familiar with historic buildings and knows how to promote it and market it. So that is key. That's all I'm going to say on this one. I don't know if that was necessarily done in this case.
So it was sold to
So
someone who didn't,
I'm sorry.
it was sold to someone who didn't want to preserve it, obviously.
Right.
Right.
And so there. Edward tried. I think Edward, but there was someone else representing the church, and so you really need someone who has that experience and who knows the city and the community. And that's just really key.
And it was for sale for 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. It was, yeah. So during that time, anybody could have saved it.
For $6 million plus whatever it would have taken to like.
Well,
get it.
I won't say what we sold it for, but it wasn't that. So,
Oh wow.
yeah,
Less than that.
yes.
So when was it, when was it actually sold?
Ray?
The deal closed on January 30th.
I mean, it's all the more remarkable, there's many multimillionaires and billionaires in this area who would probably love a building like this.
One would think.
And that nobody would step up and say, hey, I mean, even somebody like who already has several mansions, even like, I mean, honestly, why didn't the Bill Gates Foundation step up, Bill Gates has $60 billion in cash in his bank account. I looked that up somewhere. Anyway, I mean, it would be like chump change to save this place.
I think we've discovered that perhaps the billionaires don't have our interests at heart.
Because we're running out of time, but one thing I wanted to add about the road less traveled or missed opportunities. So right after the centennial, that was really the perfect time to try to preserve it. And I did a lot of research. I wrote a 7-page report. I sent it off to our national church headquarters in Manhattan. By the way, they had been fighting for 20 years to get landmark designation, or at least pre-landmark designation, removed from our headquarters building, which is 4 West 43rd Street. It was the former Columbia University Alumni Association building. Anyway. So they were kind of pretty adamant against landmarking because they had a lot of bad experience. But the church had owned it for, now that it's sold, we owned it for 52 years, longer than Denny's, longer than the people we bought it from, okay? We owned it for 52 years. If we hadn't bought it, it would have been landfill well before this, okay? Yeah, so there was a 3-year window, as it turned out, where the church leadership agreed to allow us to landmark. And as serendipity or how things go. So the first year, I scrambled to do the grant that you can get a $10,000 grant that pays for the process of landmarking. And I didn't do it with Bonnie. I rushed the grant and I kind of screwed it up, and so it was rejected. Then the second year, we did a much better job, much more professional job. It was a really good grant. And it was COVID time, and the money that comes is through For Culture. So the money that they get is through the hotel motel tax. Well, they'd shut all the hotels down, right? So they didn't have the kind of grant money that they typically would have. The other thing is it's a county fund. If I'm getting any of this wrong, you can correct me, but it's collected county-wide. So most of the landmarking grants were going to Seattle, and the outlying towns, understandably, were kind of complaining about that. So the second year when we applied for the grant, and it was we were told it was a good grant, good written well, right? But they didn't have much money, and they were trying to support other towns. So instead of Lochkelden getting landmarked, a pet cemetery in Kent was landmarked
Oh.
instead of Lochkelden. Okay? Then the third year, it was accepted. And literally, I was awarded the $10,000 grant. Like, the next day, I'm about to start using this grant. We get new church leadership. We're going to sell, don't landmark. It was that close. It was that close.
What did the church use the Lochkelden for?
Some of the pastors and their families lived there, as Greg said. Some people, a lot of missionaries stayed there, people that were full-time doing missionary work. A lot of our children were conceived in there. We had, you can see some of the pictures on the board back there. We would have our holidays there. And it was, you know, the church ideally should be like a big family, right? And so this was our family's house. And that's how we treated it. I mean, some of our youth, one of our pastors, he had 4 kids. They grew up there as little kids. He's now in his late 30s, and he came to the building right before it was torn down, and talked about how they remember sliding down the stairs with the carpet. I mean, we had Super Bowl parties. We had a big screen and screens around the house, and it's like just this big, warm family place, you know. So that's how it was used. Yeah.
I don't know if I missed that, but are you at liberty to say who bought it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, maybe we are now, but
Is it in public record?
Well, if the sale closes, it's probably.
Yeah, it was purchased by a trust.
Yeah, but it's just a shell company. You can't tell who it is. But it is a public record.
And my assumption is that the purchase and sale agreement, there's a condition that the church tear down the building.
yeah.
Well, I know that.
Rather than having that go to the new owner, because once it go to the new owner,
It could have been landmarked.
It could be forcibly landmarked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now the building was torn down before it changed ownership, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So if it had not been torn down and then so if it had been changed ownership with the building still intact, then the law could have applied to
Yes, it could have been forcibly landmarked.
That day, someone could have.
Because I'd already written this grant and proposal, I mean, people knew. People knew. It's like, boom. And these buyers, they're not stupid.
So the buyers demanded that it be torn down.
Of course, everybody knew that it could potentially be landmarked as soon as it left our hands. Everybody knew that.
So, to extend this metaphor, which Lochkelden represents, this is the way developers are working with churches today, and if churches are amenable, that's how it works. The church avoids landmarking status, and while the building is under their ownership, they get a demolition permit and tear the place down with an understanding with the developer. So that's what our future holds. And Lochkelden is just another example of this, and there are churches all over that are doing exactly the same thing. So that is the method by which they are using those pretty restrictive laws passed by the Supreme Court in 1990 to avoid landmarking and to make the money by selling it off to developers who want to use the property for other purposes. So that's standard behavior now. This is how things are going to proceed from this point forward.
You had a question, the yellow hat, and then you was, yes.
So I'm curious about how much video footage was captured in the house, like a walkthrough of the whole space. I'm curious from the digital preservation perspective, like, I mean,
There's,
yeah.
You and Aaron did a bunch of video.
I think Eric came by right around when we first started, so he's gonna have a lot. Unfortunately, had I known
Yeah.
these guys were interested, I would have had them in to the house. I don't know if we could or couldn't. I mean, we showed up on the job site and we kind of went to work, and then toward the end of it is when I found all this out. I was like, had I known, of course I would have, if I could have, I'd get in here and take pictures, you know?
But we have, like, there were hundreds of pictures that we didn't show tonight, and probably 20 more minutes of videos, and there's more that
Yeah,
Eric has. So
there's got a lot.
if you're interested in making a documentary or something like that, definitely let us know.
So, like what Scott alluded to, my name is Jeff McCord, and I've been involved in preservation for a while. At one point, I followed Clay Eels as the director of the Southwest Hill Historical Society, but I also work for a company called Nickel Brothers, which actually rescues houses by moving them. And like what Scott alluded to earlier, this is kind of a story of close calls, things that almost worked. And Scott and I talked probably about a year ago, maybe 9 months, and he was very interested in helping to facilitate the possibility of moving the house back on the site so the developer could still have what they wanted, which was the view, and the house could potentially be preserved nearby. Unfortunately, just because of the way that the church was probably being protective of the pathway and all that, it didn't come together. Scott was amazing, I mean, really championing this. And so we kind of are a part of the circular economy of the reuse and saving of structures. And like Kurt, with Earthwise, we believe strongly that when every other avenue is taken, because you always want to restore a house in place first, but using kind of a triage approach, house moving is an alternative. And and I've been peripherally involved in helping to prevent certain buildings from being torn down. One being the Pantages Mansion up on Capitol Hill. It's, I can't remember the cross streets, I apologize. Harvard and, is it Denny? No. But anyway, I think that anybody that does see future things like this, I hope that they also consider the possibility, when all else fails, to potentially encourage the moving of the building, and certainly I'll be available to tell people that I'm contacting them.
Are there any other questions right now? Just being respectful of people's time.
Yeah, just a fast one. I happen to know that the Archbishop of Seattle's mansion was sold, and they said, oh, don't worry, it's not going to be destroyed. They're going to keep that house. And he went off and bought, some lovely $2.4 million house with a view of the lake. Is it? Do you know?
Are you talking about the Hovius house on First Hill?
The Connolly house, they called it.
Connolly, yeah, it was originally the Hovius house and the Connolly house, yeah. So Historic Seattle is Dearborn House, a landmark, it's on the same block.
Okay.
So it hasn't sold, it's still owned by the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese went under contract on 4 properties on First Hill with West Bank, a Canadian developer. And so they had all these plans. And so they're going to tear down the Chancery building on First Hill, which was designed by Paul Theory. Again, got the demo permit, the whole thing that Gene was talking about. But then West Bank, they ran into financial troubles. They're still trying to finish there's a Twin Tower project on Stewart downtown. They seem to be putting in one window at a time. It's taking a long time. So I think
historic value of that home. They're not interested.
Yeah. So well, you're asking about it's not sold.
Oh, it's not sold.
No, it's not sold. So what I was saying was West Bank had an option on it. I don't know where they are with it. So it's empty. The Archdiocese is using it. The Archbishop didn't want to live in a mansion, but then he bought, he didn't buy it. The Archdiocese bought like a 2-point-something million house over
$2.4 million, yeah.
yeah, somewhere else, another mansion. But anyway, yeah. So it's vacant. It's not sold, and we don't know what's going to happen with it. That's definitely on our radars. This is literally in our backyard.
Right.
Well, as we know, for better or worse, no Supreme Court decision is necessarily set in stone forever. So is there any initiatives to possibly challenge that in the long term so that that gets overturned at some point?
So I said a little earlier, I said we've had our attorneys look at, whenever one of these cases come up, we've had them look at the situation to see if there's a loophole, and so far we haven't found anything to challenge it yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Your call to action.
Oh, one more slide. So the call, we have a call to action. If people want to.
There we go. Oh, yes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So,
Very quickly, about a couple weeks ago, 2 bills were introduced, one in the House, one in the Senate. Essentially, it was statewide. Essentially, it would say that owner consent, they said no restrictions can be placed on a property or landmarked without owner consent. And in Washington State, only Seattle, Tacoma, and King County have no owner consent required, and so it's really targeting Seattle. And so this would really change the how we do preservation here in Seattle and how we advocate. And most of the properties go through with owner consent, but occasionally they don't. And it is a tool that we do use, like the show box and some other places. And so this one, so we're working very closely with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, testifying before the Senate and the House. They're at the committee level right now, and we're just going to see how this moves through. And so we've been asking people to register to oppose these bills. If you want more information, you can contact me. Yeah.
the red website, preservedlaw.org/HB 1576-SV555.
Yeah, the Washington Trust has a really great webpage on it that explains the issues. And the motivation behind it is housing advocates think that all of a sudden, with the missing middle housing being allowed all across the state with 4 to 6 units on each parcel, that people are going to go landmark houses all over the place to keep missing middle housing from being built, and that's just not true. It's not happening. It's not going to happen like that. But anything to pit preservation against housing or pit preservation against name your fill in the blank. And so that is something that we're dealing with right now. And I know some of you have already signed in, so thank you. I appreciate your support. So yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. We will be slowly kind of packing up, so feel free to come and chat with the panel. Look at the displays in the back. You can look at Earthwise and yeah, thank you all for coming and sign up on our mailing list. We have another event. Actually, next slide. We have another, or just actually leave this up. It's fine.
Oh yeah.
And if you're feeling acquisitive, I brought along a box of books. Scott, you're feeling inquisitive?
Oh, yeah.
I brought along a box of Seattle Now and Then books, which was published in 2018. So I'm giving them away as your reward for being patient and coming here. So it's first come, first served.
Yeah,
There's only 7 of them.
And you can even have Clay and Jean sign it. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you'd like a poster from the Centennial, they're on the back, you can take one.